January 2024. A disturbing discovery has emerged in the town of Jackson, Mississippi. Outside of this town lays the Hinds County Penal Farm and Detention Facility. And at this farm was the discovery of 215 bodies, all buried in unmarked graves, simply labeled with a metal stake and a number. None of the families with loved ones uncovered at the fields were notified of their deaths. Why? Over a period of years, 215 bodies were placed in the field behind the farm without anyone knowing about the passing of their loved ones. Is there something more sinister at play here? And in Alabama, inmates are being returned after passing away in their prison cells, only to find out that they are missing some of their internal organs. Today on Unblurring the Unknown, a startling duo of current events that leaves more questions than answers. This is the Hinds County Penal Farm and missing organs in Alabama. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic. And today's episode, I just want to put a disclaimer out there, might be a little bit on the shorter end. I'm hoping not, fingers crossed, as this episode is going to be a combo of two current topics that I found in the news, and I felt like both were mysterious enough to cover as an episode. So I decided to bunch them together and cover them both for this week. However, as these are current issues, information is constantly changing, and articles continue to be updated, so I will provide all the information I can up to the point of when this episode comes out. Now, what originally brought my attention to this topic, or at least the bodies behind the Hinds County Penal Farm, was actually a TikTok. This TikTok brought me up to speed on this whole story and where this story even starts numerous years before current day. When I brought the story up to some friends and family members, they told me about a similar incident happening in Alabama, where the bodies of deceased prisoners were being returned to family members, missing some of their internal organs. It's kind of a combo of some very strange stuff, and that's kind of why I wanted to take a detour this week and cover something that's a current event, something that's in the news, and something that is really not gaining a lot of national media coverage, and that could be for a variety of reasons. So how this episode is going to go is that I'm first going to cover the Hinds County Penal Farm, and then I will go through the entire story of that. Then at the end of that, I will go over theories about what I think is going on at the Hinds County Penal Farm, and then after that, we will move into the missing organs from prisoners in Alabama, and we'll do the same for that. So we'll do them kind of topic by topic, and then obviously at the very end, we will wrap it all up. So let's start with the Hinds County Penal Farm. Our story of the Hinds County Penal Farm starts with the persistence of a mother looking for her missing son. In March of 2023, Dexter Wade would vanish from his home in Jackson in March, of course. Dexter's mom, Betterston Wade, would look into her son's disappearance, but unfortunately did not have any luck, and the local Jackson PD didn't provide much assistance with the matter either. Betterston wouldn't learn about what happened to her son until October of 2023. It had turned out that Dexter was killed shortly after leaving his home after he was struck by an SUV driven by an off-duty Jackson police officer, while Dexter was crossing an interstate highway. Now, Betterston was not notified of her son's death at that time, and the Jackson PD had to know that this was Dexter because he was killed with his ID on him, as well as a medicine bottle with his personal information on it. Now, within days of his death, the Hinds County Coroner's Office determined that, okay, this was Dexter Wade. They confirmed his identity. However, they left his body unclaimed in the county morgue for months. And I previously mentioned that Jackson PD didn't notify Betterston or any extended family members of Dexter's of his death. So Dexter Wade sat in the morgue going unclaimed. Now, Betterston had repeatedly called Jackson PD for updates on her son's case, sent them out numerous emails, and requested that Dexter's photo be shown on the local TV stations. After what seemed like she was getting stonewalled from authorities, she took her campaign to social media, and word started to make its way out to the public about Dexter's disappearance. It wasn't until August of that year where a new investigator took over Dexter's case and figured out the truth. The new investigator notified Betterston of her son's death, and it took 2 months for Betterston to track Dexter down to his final resting place at the Hinds County Penal Farm, buried in a pauper's field behind the farm. Now, before I continue, what is a pauper's field? Now, I have not heard of a pauper's field before I dove into this topic, but from kind of what I could find on the internet, it was kind of a place where states or counties, for that matter, bury people with no family they could get in contact with, people who are homeless and they pass away, and have no extended family to get in touch with. They are often buried in these paupers' fields. Now, like I said, I'd never heard of that term up until I researched it. However, I think that's important to add to this case. Now, of course, Dexter Wade's final resting place at the Hinds County Penal Farm, had no headstone, only a number placard on a metal rod. Now, the shittiest thing about all of this is that for Betterston to remove Dexter from the pauper's field, she had to pay a $250 fee to pay for the removal of his body, which could quite perhaps be the most shittiest thing I've ever heard, because if you as the police department have somebody that you have not notified the family and they've sat in the morgue for months upon months because you weren't doing your job, and now we're paying the family to remove the body from a place which the family obviously wouldn't have wanted them buried there in the first place, and you charging them is probably some of the most ridiculous stuff I've ever heard. But that's kind of off topic. On topic, but off topic. However, the story of the penal farm does not stop there. Since this initial discovery, more people have come forward about their loved ones seemingly buried at the pauper's field with no given explanation. Take the instance of Mario Terrell Moore, who wasn't discovered to be dead from family members until his sister saw it on an online article which revealed 24 homicide victims. Mario was second on the list. Now, his sister, Marquita Moore, learned about her brother's death on October 10th. This is October 10th of 2023. However, Mario was killed on February 2nd, 2023, a whole 8 months before this article was published, and the Jackson PD did not notify the public or the families for any of these 24 victims. Now, I could not find if the other 11 victims, along with Mario, were also buried at this pauper's field. That I could not find information for. Now, when Marquita Moore went to the Jackson PD headquarters to question why they were never notified about Mario's death and to find out more information on what had happened to Mario, Marquita was told that no one was available to help her. Now, Marquita would later find out that her brother was beaten to death, wrapped in a tarp, and left in the street. For months after his death in February, his body laid unclaimed at the county morgue, while Marquita and her family were not notified. After going unclaimed, his body was buried by inmates at the Hinds County Penal Farm on July 14th of 2023, the same day as Dexter Wade was also buried at the farm. Now, it does not stop there, because there's another story that goes with the Hinds County Penal Farm. On December 4th of 2023, the family of Jonathan David Hankins was notified of his death through local news outlets. Hankins was first reported missing in June of 2022. Now, this would imply that the pauper's field was being used over a period of multiple years, because Jonathan would be discovered only a month after he was reported missing, deceased in a motel room in Jackson. Now, his death is believed to have been of an overdose. However, the common thread in all of these stories is that Jackson PD did not notify the family in any instance. They did not notify the family of Jonathan's death, and instead, much like Mario Terrell Moore's family and Dexter Wade's. For over a year, Jonathan's mother, Gretchen Hankins, contacted Jackson PD for updates on her son's case and if they had any leads. She was told every time that they did not have any new information, even though they ID'd Jonathan pretty much immediately after they discovered him in his hotel room, because Jonathan had his ID on him. Now, this whole story about the Hinds County Penal Farm has been in and out of the news ever since the Dexter Wade revelation last fall. But in my opinion, this is not receiving the amount of national outrage that it honestly should. These are just 3 cases of people's loved ones and family members who deserve the right to have a proper burial and ceremony from their families. Gretchen Hankins spoke to NBC News, and this is what she had said, and I quote, "I want people to know that somebody is not doing their job and making folks go through what I've been through. They can't even do the job of notifying a dead person's next of kin. They probably just thought, another drug addict, gone." End quote. Whether or not this is the mindset that the Jackson PD had when burying bodies in this field or not, it doesn't get us away from the fact that there are 212 other bodies that need to be identified, each only labeled with a metal rod and a number placard. Whether or not this was because of a lack of effort or some sort of cover-up remains to be seen, but we will go over all of that in the theories section. Now, National Civil Rights Attorney Ben Crump, who to my knowledge is representing all 3 of the families of the victims that I mentioned above, has called on the Department of Justice to launch an investigation into this case as to why no one has been notified of their loved one's death. Now, it turns out the full list of bodies was released in December of last year, so December of 2023, and this is how we know that there are a total of 215 bodies buried back there to begin with. And as more families claim their loved ones from the field, asking why they had no idea about what happened to them, they are jumping onto Ben Crump's case and search for answers. Now, new police chief Joseph Wade, to my knowledge no relation to Dexter, said that this level of oversight happened prior to him being the police chief and has since implemented a new death notification system, which is something the department never had. Why the department never had this in the first place to begin with, I have no idea, and it seems like nobody else on the internet has any ideas of why that's the case either. Now, Jackson Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba, I hope I pronounced that right, when asked for comments about the incident on January 13th, so that's when the big article came out about the 215 bodies being buried at the Hinds County Penal Farm, Lumumba said that the national report done on the Paupers Field was quote-unquote misinformation and quote-unquote dangerous. He later continues his statement made with the following, and I quote, "There has been a national story that has been put out about the city of Jackson which is patently false and absolutely ridiculous. Some of you have seen it. It's been put out onto social media that there is a mass grave behind the Jackson jail that we're throwing bodies into. The first thing is, if you live in Jackson, you know that we don't have a jail. So it's kind of hard to have a mass grave when you don't even have a jail." Now, I will address those comments here very shortly, but Lumumba continued and said that Jackson's holding cell only holds about 10 people. And the following that I'm about to read are more quotes from that day on which he spoke. And I quote, "Every county in the United States of America has a paupers field. Homeless people are often buried in paupers fields. People who died in local jails and their families were unable to be contacted or connected, or simply they didn't have a family. Or in some instances, when someone dies and they're unable to make contact with the family in a certain period of time, then it is the Hinds County coroner and the Hinds County officials who have the authority, and they're the ones who make the decisions. We don't bury nobody in Jackson. We don't unbury nobody in Jackson. We don't make any decisions on that," he continued. And then he said it again, and this is another quote, and I quote, "So it is dangerous when people develop a narrative for your community because what it creates is disharmony. It creates friction." Close quote. So before I get on to theories and our second topic, I kind of want to address some of these comments that Mayor Lumumba said. First off, it doesn't matter whether you have a jail or don't have a jail within the city limits of Jackson. These people died in the city of Jackson, and the police department failed to acknowledge the family members and instead buried them in a field. Within, like, you bury them in a field without even a goddamn headstone to say who they were. And it also doesn't get away from the fact that what if Betterston Wade didn't have the persistence that she did in discovering this whole kind of incident or cover-up or whatever you want to call it? Would those people still be laying in the ground while families call the police department begging for answers about their loved ones? The answer to that would probably be most likely. And the fact of the matter is that the statement about when the family is unable to be contacted within a certain period of time is horseshit, because the department never contacted anyone and then didn't say they had the bodies in the first place. Like, the mayor cannot be trying to put this on the county or redirect the heat from the police department, because at the end of the day, this is your cross to bear, Mr. Mayor, and that you can redeflect this however much you want, but unfortunately, you fall within Hinds County. These people are dying in Jackson, Mississippi. You need to take some sort of accountability on behalf of the police department, because they clearly have taken no accountability as to why families are not being notified of their family member's death, and then the fact that you're burying them in a field outside of the city and then paying them, or making them pay $250 to even get their loved ones out from the ground to begin with is just completely ridiculous. But that's the end of my rant, and I hope for everybody who's listening feels the same way that I do about this, because there is no excuse as to why that the mayor is redirecting all this and why the PD cannot take some sort of responsibility for their actions. It's just completely ridiculous to me. So, with all of that being said, let's move into some theories about all this, and then we'll move into the second topic about prisoners missing organs in Alabama, which is just as confusing and just as interesting. Now, my first theory, and I only have two theories because I think there's only two theories that would really go with this, or two theories that I came up with that could really go with this. And the first theory being cover-up. Now, this one's pretty cut and dry. That this is just a flat-out cover-up. Either they are trying to gain the county extra revenue by paying families to exhume the bodies. That could be a possibility. I mean, if you do the math on the 215 bodies that are buried behind the Penal farm, and then the math of $250 per body, that kicks out to somewhere around $53,000 and some change. So that's not a huge amount of money that'd be going back to the county or the town for that matter. So is there some evidence to support that? I don't know. Unless they are pocketing the money, then that could be something. But if it was going straight to the county, that would be kind of, I don't think, enough money to truly be convinced that could be it. But perhaps this was a way for the police department to put bodies who they felt might have just not been important to society. So they were negligent and now that the police department is caught, they have to somehow cover it up and justify why they did it to begin with. Like what Gretchen Hankins said about Jonathan, that perhaps they just saw that Jonathan had overdosed and was like, oh, well, just another dead junkie, when in reality, it doesn't matter what happened. You still need to have basic human decency. So, is the police department covering this up to save face, to cover their ass? Could be. Very strong possibility that could be it. Now, my second theory being neglect. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the monetary gain, or in the previous theory, the monetary gain or cover-up behind this might be a little bit of a stretch. But if this was just neglect, this was going on for years. The neglect theory holds some weight, as well as when Betterston Wade went to exhume her son from the field, her son was just in a black body bag. They didn't even put him in a casket or a box of any sort. Now, I'm kind of leaning towards this theory, even though I want to go with the more out there theory. I think these people are just all scumbags. The Jackson Police Department is most likely corrupt in some facet, maybe not the whole department, but definitely some, and they just neglected these people who they felt weren't outstanding members of society, whether it be the manner in which they died, or perhaps just how they felt about that person, or how the department felt. However, the new police chief of the Jackson Police Department needs to acknowledge the mistakes made by the prior administration And unfortunately, this story will probably get worse as more bodies are on Earth, and perhaps the truth comes more into light. I think it's hard to say for certain what the true cause of this is, but I think it could be a combo of the two. I think on the surface, this is just basic neglect. This is just basic lack of human decency, and then realizing that they are caught, they are basically having to cover their tracks, so to speak, and justify their decision-making processes, which just is ridiculous to me. But with that being said, let's move into the second topic of the episode. And let's talk about some missing organs in Alabama. Now, some of you might have heard this story, and I don't think it was big enough to cover by itself, so that's kind of why I'm looping it in with this week's episode. Now, this story takes place in the Hamilton Aged and Infirmed Custody Facility in Alabama, where Charles Singleton was an inmate at. Charles passed away at the jail in November of 2021. Now, after Charles had died in the jail, his remains were transferred to the University of Alabama, where they did an autopsy on his body. Now, after the autopsy, Charles' family requested that his body be transferred over to a funeral home in Pell City, Alabama. When Charles' body arrived at the funeral home in Pell City, the funeral home director told Charles' family that to prepare the body for viewing, for example, open casket, would be very difficult. The funeral home director notified the family of its, and I quote, noticeable state of decomposition and quote unquote, advanced skin slippage, which I don't even know what advanced skin slippage is, but it doesn't sound good. I'm kind of unfamiliar with some of these terms, as I haven't dug into a whole lot of true crime or unsolved murder cases, or so on and so forth. So some of these terms I haven't heard of before, but I don't know what advanced skin slippage is. But like I said, it can't be a good thing, that's for sure. The funeral home director also notified the family that Charles's body had no organs and that his brain was also removed. So obviously this was alarming for Charles's family, as it would be alarming for anyone's family, and they wondered why in the world would Charles be missing his organs. When the University of Alabama was asked about the whereabouts of Charles's organs, obviously University of Alabama was the last people to basically handle the body because they did the autopsy, and when they were asked from ABC 3340, they replied with the following comment. And I quote, "We do not comment on pending litigation. We only conduct autopsies with consent or authorization and follow standard procedures equitably for anyone consented to or authorized for an autopsy. The autopsy practice is accredited by the College of American Pathologists and staffed by credentialed physicians who are certified by the American Board of Pathology." They continued and said, "In an autopsy, organs and tissues are removed to best determine the cause of death. Autopsy consent includes consent for final disposition of the organs and tissues. Unless specifically requested, organs are not returned to the body." Now, they continued their statement with the following. "UAB is among providers that, consistent with Alabama law, conduct autopsies of incarcerated persons at the direction of the state of Alabama. A panel of medical ethicists reviewed and endorsed our protocols regarding autopsies conducted for incarcerated persons." Now, that whole quote was a mouthful and was kind of a lot of words that kind of dodged the question. On this actually kind of raises more questions than answers. The University of Alabama was advised to remove the organs because of the autopsy. Like they stated, they remove organs and tissues and stuff for the autopsy, but they said in their own statement that unless specifically requested, that they are normally returned to the body. So why were they not returned? Now, they did say that they conduct these autopsies through direction of the state. So maybe the state told them not to return the organs. But if they did, what would they do with them? And why would they think that this would raise some question mark, or why this wouldn't raise some question marks from the family? Because of course it would. The body, your loved one comes back from the prison and they're deceased and they come to the funeral home and you want to have an open casket because you want to respect this individual regardless of whatever happened or whatever choices they made in life. You still want to respect this person and celebrate their life in some sort as they were your family member. And you discover that they are suddenly missing all their organs. You're not going to say, well, this is fine. Like, no, that's not going to, like, nobody's going to say, oh, well, this is fine. Like, that's just not, like, again, much like the Hinds County Penal Ward, I'm scratching my head as to why somebody would not return the organs in the first place. But we will get into all the juicy stuff and theories about what could be going on here. Now, believe it or not, this isn't the first time this has happened in the state of Alabama. Now, last November, so November 2023, the family of Brandon Clay Dotson, who died in prison this past November, so November 2023, have been trying to get Brandon's heart back, which was missing from his body when it was returned from the autopsy. The family had never received a death certificate, and Dotson's family tried for 5 days to claim his body after death. And when it was finally returned, his mother noticed bruising around the back of his neck and excessive swelling around the head. Because of this, and of course the big one, Dotson missing his heart, the family filed a lawsuit. The Dotsons hired their own pathologist, and the lawsuit they filed was reviewed by Fox News for an article which included the following remarks, and they include, and I quote, "Reasonable for plaintiff to believe that Dotson's heart was removed for an improper purpose, namely to be sent to UAB for the purpose of providing UAB-SOM, so the University of Alabama Hersink School of Medicine, students with a laboratory specimen to experiment on or study," close quote. The university then came back and said the following to Fox News in response to this lawsuit, and I quote, "UAB did not perform this autopsy and has not been involved in this matter," close quote. So who the hell did the autopsy? They performed the autopsy on Charles Singleton, the University of Alabama, but not Brandon Clay Dotson? That is obviously very suspect from the university's behalf, but I'm not sure if there's enough evidence of foul play from the university side of things. However, the Dotson family has taken it a step further and requested a list of all organs that have been removed from people who have died while being incarcerated and passed away while in prison in Alabama since 2013. The lawsuit filed by the Dotsons lists this document, so the list of organs that were removed from people in Alabama prisons. So, a quote that is included in this document states the following. "This document is critical to fulfill the third measure sought in the motion for TRO, so temporary restraining order, freezing the practice of improperly and potentially illegally retaining organs from autopsies without providing notice or seeking consent from the family members of the deceased." End quote. So what could be going on, or what could be at work here? Let's get into some of these theories about what could be in play here at all. Now, there's a couple theories that I have for this, and most notably 3 theories, which I think are there's some merit and there's some explanation behind them. Now, our first one, the big one, and we're really going out, not outside of the box, but we're really going down the conspiracy theory route here. And that being the first theory of organ harvesting. Could this be some sort of organ trafficking operation going on here? Now, on the surface, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that the University of Alabama would conduct the Singleton autopsy and then claim they had no hand in the Dotson autopsy. That just doesn't make sense. So, could there be an organization that is getting the bodies before they are shipped off to the university, or the funeral homes, that is, and they are taking the organs and then telling the university, in conjunction with the government and the prison systems, to help sweep it under the rug and delay as much as possible the truth behind what is actually going on? I think this is a little far on the speculation side, but I like this theory. My second theory being neglect. Much like the Hinds County Penal Ward, or Penal Farm, excuse me, this could just be blatant neglect of these bodies. This is also possible. They could be conducting the autopsies and then, just because they're prisoners, saying that they don't have to be as careful or can basically just slack off and it's no big deal, just do exactly that and slack off. But I think to forget all of somebody's organs just because, a pathologist performing the autopsy, just because thinking they're a prisoner and that they're less than everybody else and just forgetting all their organs. I think just to forget somebody's organs when you're returning somebody's body is kind of a big whoopsie. That's not something I think that would be a normally done thing. But I guess it could be any reason. If you want to go with that theory, it could be any reason. Now, my last theory is scientific experimentation. Much like the trafficking theory, perhaps this is a cover-up for some experimentation being done on prisoners. Maybe the government or powers that be view their body parts as expendable and can use their heart, or, in the case of Charles Singleton, the brain, to see what makes criminals work the way they do. Interesting to think about it for sure, and I don't think that this would be the first time something like this has been done before. Now, according to UChicago News, and this is a quote from an article I found on researchers looking at the brain scans of prisoners and how they differ from everyday people, and this is a quote, "Examining brain scans of more than 800 incarcerated men, new research co-authored by a leading University of Chicago neuroscientist found that individuals who had committed or attempted homicide had reduced gray matter when compared to those involved in other offenses. Those reductions were especially apparent in the regions of the brain associated with emotional processing, behavioral control, and social cognition." Now, this is a very interesting theory, and I think that there's some serious evidence to back it up. With that being said, I'm leaning towards the idea that this could be some sort of scientific experimentation / cover-up. Instead of asking the families on whether or not the body parts can be used for experimentation, they are just taking them, thinking that they are prisoners, they can just take the bodies, they don't have to ask any questions, or that they're lesser humans for whatever reason, and using their body parts like guinea pigs for lab experiments. Kind of sick and twisted, but honestly, I can see it. The organ trafficking thing, I think could be a stretch, but I think we've seen crazier things to where we can't completely rule that out. Obviously, if you do any research into black market organ trafficking, the first thing is going to come up is China, and China does this a lot, where their prisoners pass away in prisons and they take their organs forcibly without notifying the family, because obviously this is China, and sell their organs on the black market because they don't care. However, that's China, and this is the United States of America, so you would like to imagine that something like organ harvesting or black market organ trafficking would not be taking place. However, I think there's crazier things that have happened in the United States to where we can't possibly rule that out entirely. But my theory in all this, like I said, is that I think this is a science experiment of some sort, that they are trying to cover their ass. And if the Dotson family is able to get a list of all of the body parts or organs that were harvested from prisoners without family's permission or harvested from the prison systems, that'll be a big smoking gun on whether or not this is legitimate, and that the state of Alabama or the state of Alabama's prison systems or even the University of Alabama has had some hand in experimenting on the bodies of deceased prisoners. But with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode. Kind of a little bit of a combo. I hope you all liked it. I hope you enjoyed. Again, trying a couple different things the past couple weeks in terms of what I'm putting out there for content. I think taking a detour from our normally scheduled programming and going into something like current events is very interesting, and there's a reason I did this detour in the first place, because I felt like this was very interesting, and I felt like more people needed to know about these instances that were going on. But with that being said, it is obligatory plug time, and if you are listening to this on Spotify, please make sure that you have notifications turned on so you are notified every time I post a new episode. If you are listening to this on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed to also get notified every time that I post a new episode, and vice versa. Do the same whether or not you're listening on YouTube, Spotify. Go follow me on both. I greatly appreciate it. If you are also not aware, I also have an Instagram. That is Unblurring the Unknown on Instagram. I'll say that again, Unblurring the Unknown on Instagram. Not only will I be posting photos and pictures from today's episode, also there will be the custom cover art for this week's episode, as I am now doing that for every week. I have custom album art for all of the episodes. So please go ahead, follow me on Instagram so you get to see all of that as well. But with that being said, I really appreciate you turning into this week's episode. And if you have any topic suggestions you want to get out to me, I have been getting a few topic suggestions, and they're slowly making their way into the queue in the topic list I have going on. Please send them to my email. That is unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. I will say that again, unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. Send me a topic suggestion. I will look into it. I'll probably put it into the queue and hopefully do an episode on it. But with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. This one was very fun and interesting for me, and it was fun to take a little detour from what I regularly put out. But with that being said, thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.